Hi, Brian Lehrer here. Up next, Brian Lehrer Weekend. 3 of our favorite segments from the week packaged together for you to listen to on the weekend. So enjoy, and I'll see you back on the radio Monday at 10 a.m. on WNYC and WNYC.org. It's the Brian Lehrer Show on WNYC. Good morning again, everyone. With us now, former Jersey City Mayor Steve Fulop, who has just made a surprising to many people transition to a job in New York. Just after he ran as a progressive for governor of New Jersey last year, he is now the top dog for the group that pushes the interests of the most powerful corporations in New York City and is working hard against parts of Mayor Mamdani's agenda already. For example, he's already called Mamdani's corporate tax hike proposal suicide for the city. New York Magazine had a story called New York CEOs are gearing up for a battle with Mamdani about Fulop taking the reins and what the members want. We'll hear some of his policy positions and arguments for them and also ask, has Steve Fulop sold out to the oligarchy? The job is president and CEO of the Partnership for New York City. Now, the partnership's website says it represents, quote, more than 300 preeminent corporate, investment, and entrepreneurial firms, unquote. They span the alphabet from American Express to Coca-Cola to DoorDash to Live Nation to the New York Stock Exchange itself to Paramount Skydance to also a few that might surprise you like the WNBA and the New York Times. Steve Fulop, thanks for coming on in this new role. Welcome back to WNYC.
Brian, thanks for having me. I love that introduction.
Well, let me go right to that question of who you are, that you could run to the left of Mikey Sherrill in the primary, but now take this job advocating for many of the most powerful corporations in the world, largely in battle mode with Mayor Mamdani to a meaningful degree, according to New York Magazine. And just for a little more background for our listeners in New York who may not have followed the New Jersey race, as an example, the Progressive Change Campaign Committee associated with Elizabeth Warren endorsed you or Ras Baraka and said, not Mikey Sherrill. That's one prominent example. Now the progressive view might be that you've signed on to represent the oligarchy. So for people who don't get the transition, who are saying, Steve Fulop, wait, what? How should anyone understand you in relation to this leap?
So let me say a couple of things to that, if I may. So let me start by saying that the thing that is most interesting to me is that there's 800,000 employees that this group represents. And many of the things they care about are consistent with everyday New Yorkers. So I don't view it as adverse or at war or looking for conflict with Mayor Mamdani. We actually have a pretty good relationship. We're looking for opportunities to overlap, and my job is making sure that New York City stays competitive. With regards to your comment on running to the left of Mikey, in New Jersey, for those that are familiar with it, sometimes it gets conflated, the anti-establishment with progressive. So I wasn't the most progressive furthest left candidate, but the biggest differences were establishment versus anti-establishment. And finally, I would just tell you, for 20 years on the city council and as mayor in Jersey City, I ran as a nonpartisan election. We didn't have Republicans or Democrats. Republicans supported me, independents supported me, and Democrats supported me. So I view myself as a compassionate, thoughtful, problem-solving Democrat.
So you were quoted in November on the corporate tax hike proposal from Mamdani that it would be, quote, absolute suicide for New York City and an absolute dream for New Jersey, unquote. Suicide is a strong word. If you want people to believe that you're actually concerned about most New Yorkers and those 800,000 employees, like you just said, and you're not just playing hardball for your richest of the rich constituency, make your case.
So let me start by saying that the things that the partnership advocates for are not only taxes. I mean, people think of it in that context, but I'll point out there's 800,000 employees. They have a venture fund that seeds early stage New York startup companies, creating thousands of jobs. We have an accelerator that overlaps with technology between the private sector and the public sector, creating thousands of jobs. We seed and fund early stage childhood centers, childcare centers, infrastructure. I mean, we're part of the intersection of the public and private sector in many ways that people don't even realize. The tax conversation is important and it's nuanced. I just want to take you back to the fact that when Mayor Mamdani ran as a candidate, he said, these are my objectives to get accomplished, and it doesn't matter how we fund them as long as we get them accomplished. About 8 days after he took office, he stood with Governor Hochul and said, I'm very proud that we're going to be able to get the things accomplished that I find most important at this moment, particularly childcare. Subsequent to that, a couple weeks later, he said, we need to have a tax increase. And there wasn't a lot of clarity on why we need to have a tax increase. It wasn't a lot of clarity of what we need to fund. He just said there's a huge budget gap, which is standard practice for new mayors to blame their old mayors. The talking point that he had, Brian, was that we need to move New York tax rates on the corporate side to replicate New Jersey. And coincidentally, I have familiarity with both of those. Currently, when you layer on all of the different taxes for corporations in New York, you are at 17%, which is marginally more than New Jersey already. If you replicate the tax rate for New Jersey, you would move New York City to 22% versus New Jersey staying at 11%. So all I said was that, at some point you hit a tripwire and people do make a decision to leave. If your taxes are 100% higher than you could have them a mile away, people are going to make that decision. It's not overnight, but some people will make that decision and it will be bad for New York.
So this weekend, as a follow-up, as I was, asking myself, Steve Fulop is doing what? Wait, what? I looked at your Democratic primary for governor campaign website, which is still up. You had a section called affordability, and two of the topics within that were what you called a corruption tax and income tax. And on income tax, you wrote, federal aid to New Jersey is likely to continue to decline under the Trump administration, bringing the state to a fiscal cliff. Meanwhile, the 2017 federal tax law cuts taxes for the wealthiest individuals and corporations. To address the issues of income disparity, tax fairness, and fiscal responsibility, as governor, Fulop would revise the state income tax to add brackets for higher income residents, including new rates on earners over $2 million, $5 million, and $10 million in income. These new tax brackets will provide much-needed revenue for public investments. From your campaign website, it sounds like just the opposite of what you're representing for your high-income members now in New York. Why not?
Okay, well, first of all, I would point on the fact that what I outlined there was revenue gaps in New Jersey and some ways that you could potentially solve it. I think the starting point is where are the gaps in New York and the proposed solutions. The proposed solutions, as I said today, are to be 100% higher than New Jersey. And I'll go back to the fact that for 20 years on the city council and as the mayor, kind of where I've been on taxes has been remarkably consistent. For 8 of the 12 years, as I was the mayor in Jersey City, we didn't raise taxes. We were very, very militant about the fact that making New Jersey and particularly Jersey City is competitive. So I would say none of that stuff has changed. And one other point, again, people conflate the partnership with just speaking about the CEOs and saying that they're opposed to taxes, which isn't true. There's 800,000 employees, number one. Most of what they do is not actually about taxes. And there's been tax increases in the history of New York City that have been necessary, and the partnership has actually supported. So I would go back to the fact and say, if you have a justifiable reason and you have a conversation and it doesn't feel like it's going into some abyss and you're not nebulous on details, it's a conversation to have. I mean, the partnership was the first amongst organizations to support the congestion pricing. I mean, you wouldn't think they would, but they did. Mayor Bloomberg solicited them for help on a tax increase. The partnership was supportive of that, actually. So I don't think it's fair to characterize it that way. It's how things are positioned at what moment in time is the right way to do it. And it's hard to compare New Jersey to New York in that exact context as you did.
And listeners, we can take some questions for the new head of the partnership for New York City. Maybe some of you know the name Kathy Wild, who is the outgoing president and CEO. Now it's Steve Fulop, the former mayor of Jersey City, who's coming in. 212-433 WNYC, 212-433-9692. following up on what you just said about not raising taxes for most of your time as mayor of Jersey City, I also heard when you told Michael Hill in an interview on Morning Edition, we had 8 years of no tax increases. We prioritized making the city affordable by not having tax increases, and that was the main priority. So in calling no tax hikes your main priority for making Jersey City affordable, why wouldn't that just make it more affordable for the better off people who pay a lot of taxes? Affordable for everyone else would be, more affordable child care, for example, which Mamdani says is his number one. Is that a disconnect on no tax hikes as the main key to affordability?
No, I'm not tracking why you think only wealthy people pay property taxes. I think actually property taxes has a disproportionate impact on more economically challenged people. So keeping taxes stable is actually very, very important to the affordability conversation. When you talk about kind of the rent freeze here in New York, so let's just kind of put that into the context of New York City, I think that the position that we have conveyed would be, if you are going to confront the affordability crisis with a rent freeze, you need to also confront the cost side, because New York City is amongst the most expensive places from the cost side, and property tax reform is at the core of that. And de Blasio and Adams, none of them wanted to kind of engage in that. And so we've been saying, hey, the freeze conversation can happen, clearly, but we also need to have a conversation around property tax reform, and hopefully Mayor Mamdani has the courage to do it. He said he has, but I guess we'll see how it goes over the next couple of months.
Right. But that's a different question than just holding the line on taxes, because I think there is a lot of agreement that the property tax system is unfair to certain kinds of property owners and even renters, and too fair to others. But that's a different question than just saying no tax hikes leads to affordability, right? Why isn't this the same old...
No.
No, go ahead. You go.
Sorry, Brian. I believe that tax stability is very, very important to affordability. You got to also create more supply of housing so that rents don't increase. I think Jersey City did that better than anybody else in New Jersey. Data points to that. We had more
job creation. Which, by the way, I'll tell our listeners, we will get to that, where you and the mayor seem to be quite aligned, and he even used your record in Jersey City as mayor as a model for some of what he wants to do with housing in New York. So, props on that from the mayor. But go ahead, you can finish that answer.
Yeah, what I was saying, Brian, is that it's all of it together. Okay. And so the property tax conversation that we were having with Michael Hill was in a different context, obviously. It was about budgets and whatnot. But from my standpoint, yes, stability on taxes is important for people. It impacts renters and it impacts homeowners. And in a city like Jersey City, it's not fair to say it's only the wealthiest people. It's actually one of the most economically and socioeconomically diverse places in the entire country. So we have everybody there, and that certainly impacts everybody. And I'm actually proud of the fact we kept them stable, because I think it's really important.
On what I think is your main argument for not raising the taxes on corporations or highest earning individuals for New York City, that is that there would be an exodus. The corporate leaders have always predicted that over all kinds of things, from minimum wage laws to paid family leave, certainly to tax rate, and it hasn't happened. And in fact, in the tech industry, and I know you say I'm going to anticipate part of your answer, I think, which is that it's not so much about the companies that are here going to pick up and walk out, but it's going to be hard to create new jobs because companies will look at New Jersey and other places and say, well, it's going to be better for us to locate there. But in fact, the tech industry, arguably the most important major business sector now in recent years, has surged jobs to New York City, as I know you know, making New York the number 2 tech jobs hub, second only to Silicon Valley itself. In the context of all these warnings about taxes in New York that already existed. So why should people believe all of a sudden jobs won't come here?
Okay, so 2 things on that. On the job creation front, and this is one of the things that I pointed out with regards to the proposals on the kind of tax increases. From New York City standpoint, last year, the job creation data was terrible. It replicated what you saw in 2009 and 2020, so 2 recession times. You had 4 months out of the 12 where you had net losses, And from the previous year to 2025, you were down 73% on private sector job creation. So, there's a warning sign that's flashing already with regards to competitiveness. Now, you could say that could be AI, it could be tariffs, it could be change in administration. Nobody knows, but there is a warning sign that's flashing on new job creation. So that's number one. Number two is, I don't think anybody realistically thinks that, you raise taxes and the next day everybody picks up and leaves. But there is a gradual hemorrhaging of jobs, which long-term impacts you. Now, everybody has a different tripwire. Is it 10% more than your neighbor? Is it 20% more than your neighbor? I feel pretty comfortable that if you raise taxes to 100% more than your neighbor, according to the CBC, okay, and that's nonpartisan, that people will make a decision to leave. Now, on the wealthiest people, Brian, I would say the following. If you take your 1,000 or 2,000 or 3,000 wealthiest people in New York City, what you classified as oligarchs, and you could say, we don't care if those people leave, those people have a disproportionate impact on the budget. They pay a massive amount. Now, you look at 3,000 people, they're all different race, religion, backgrounds. The one consistent thing is they generally have multiple homes and options on where to go. You need 5 or 10 of them to leave. You don't need 1,000 of them to leave to have a huge impact on the budget. And so there is a tripwire at some point. You don't know where that is, and I don't know where that is. My point is that when you get to what we're talking about there, more than likely you will hit it with a huge number of them.
You also said to Michael Hill in the interview, wait, I'm looking for this quote. What did I do with it? Well, I'll come back to that, and I'm going to take a listener question for you instead. Listener writes in a text, does the partnership consider income inequality an issue beyond the well-paid employees they represent?
Yes. Affordability, income inequality, direction that you're seeing both across the country and in the region, all are major concerns for us. And I think they're concerns for anybody in New York, and I think that's part of the reason why Mayor Mamdani got elected. I think he speaks to the fact that it's hard to find housing, and affordability is a real crisis. So the short answer is yes, and we do our best to engage in issues around that as well.
So what would you do about that? Because you argue for economic growth, but the stats show that the growth for a long time, locally and nationally, has concentrated in the incomes of the top 20% or so, and everyone else is stagnating or declining. So wouldn't that suggest that you need to address distribution, at least as aggressively as growth, which is not the talk that I think I hear you talking?
No, I think that job creation is a part of it. The biggest way to confront the affordability conversation is better jobs, which lead to better paychecks, okay? And you're not talking about the top 1%, you're talking across the board. When places like, use what you said earlier, let's say the oligarchs, and we classify them, but if you talk about their companies, let's say JP Morgan has more jobs for the first time in Texas than New York. Think about that. Goldman Sachs hasn't created a net job in New York for 7, 8 years, they say, right? Those things are indicators that you're not going to confront the affordability conversation if you're not creating more jobs for more people. So I think you do need to grow kind of this job sector. You also need to confront the housing crisis, which we touched on earlier. You need to confront the child care conversation, which I think we're in alignment on, that's a real problem. So, I mean, I think it's multifaceted, and I think that we want to be part of it. And the conversation, when you did the intro, you referenced the New York Post or New York Magazine saying that we're gearing up for war, and I wouldn't classify that.
Pretty that different, way. New York Post and New York Magazine. It was New York Magazine.
Well, I think there was an editorial today in the Post. That's why I was saying that the Post also had something on they had something on that today, kind of a similar tone, and they referenced New York Magazine. But my take on it is that we're looking for overlap and opportunities and where to work together. I mean, I'm familiar with kind of the challenges Mayor Mamdani has. I was a mayor at 36, 37 years old in an equally complicated city or similarly complicated. And so, I think we're not looking for a war. We're looking for opportunities to work together.
How do you get to universal child care without the tax increase?
Look, I think that the governor has said we're going to have a pilot program for this year. I think we're supportive of that. I think that there's a whole host of legislative changes to make it more permissible and easier for companies to open childcare centers, which you'll probably see the partnership coming out with shortly. And you should know that the overwhelming majority of partnership companies representing, again, hundreds of thousands of employees do offer childcare to their employees because it's something that we think is important. So we want to be part of the conversation there. I think we have a lot to offer, and I think you'll see something coming out from us in the next week or so.
But on becoming more aggressive on your pushback to the progressive mayor and to progressives in general in New York City, as is the premise of the New York Magazine article, here's an example of the push. The political consultant Bradley Tusk, who worked for Mayor Bloomberg and others, wants you to get the partnership involved in running candidates to the right of Mayor Mamdani for city council and state legislature, running candidates. Are you interested in that? Let me read for our listeners what Tusk wrote on his Substack. The CEOs who comprise the partnership board might hate the idea of engaging directly in lowly city council or state senate primaries, but they're also not stupid. If you make the case to them that this has to happen for their views to become policy and law, most of them will get it. And he writes, there is currently no centrist organization in New York City that serves as a counterpart to the DSA or the Working Families Party. No organization to recruit or train candidates, build grassroots operations, build a bench. That's the quote. Is there any of that you disagree with?
I do. There's been zero conversations or zero appetite from anybody that I've spoken to involved in the partnership or the partnership board to support candidates or engage directly in electoral politics in that way. I think what they want to be more engaged in is better communication and activation for our 800,000 employees. I think there's an opportunity there. I think for most of the time we speak kind of a practical solution to any sort of problem. And we should be better communicating with those employees why we see certain things a certain way and what the impact can be. And we don't do that right now. It's been a lot of kind of more shuttle diplomacy between people that we know. And I think part of my task is to organize that. And I think over the next couple of years, you will see kind of this base that we start with as being kind of a significant advocacy arm. But I don't foresee it ever supporting candidates and saying we endorse Brian and we don't like Steve.
I'm not running. But do you accept the premise that your membership, more or less, wants you to be more aggressive when it comes to their agenda for city politics than your predecessor, Kathy Wild, was?
Yeah, for sure. There's no question about that. I'll answer that directly. There's no question that they want to be more engaged, more aggressive, more vocal. I think that, we have a lot of experience with a lot of these issues, and I think that we bring something to the table. When you talk about an issue of homeless encampments, we have a presence in Seattle and Portland and LA and New York and Europe. We have perspective on these sort of things from experience that I think can be helpful. Childcare, the majority of our companies offer childcare. Taxes, we make decisions around this stuff. So, yeah, they want to be more engaged, and I think that the starting point shouldn't be just don't hurt us too bad. The conversation should be we are part of this ecosystem, and we want to see New York succeed, and we want to make sure that New York is competitive.
Matt, in Jersey City, you're on WNYC with your former mayor, who has now become president and CEO of the Partnership for New York City, which represents 300 major corporations to the city government of New York. Matt, hello.
Hey, Brian. Thanks for taking my call. And hey, Steve. I wanted to call sort of to lift Steve up a little, but also express some disappointment. I think he's an incredible political operator. I think this is a great job for him. And I was, by and large, super happy with his work in the city. And I think he's always had ambitions. And I think, unlike a lot of politicians, we saw with de Blasio, he sort of was running for other offices while running the city, or not running it, some might argue. I always felt like Steve, while he may have been looking to build for the future, was doing it by building a solid legacy. With all of that said, we just got a report that there's a massive budget deficit. that could account for about 30% of the budget. And I will say I'm disappointed and not entirely surprised because of this ambition that maybe Steve left Jersey City holding the bag a little. And I was wondering how he might sort of reflect on that and how it hurts his legacy, and also how that might relate to how much we can trust him sort of with the interests of New York City.
Matt, thank you very much. And full disclosure, Mayor Solomon might be a guest on tomorrow's show, so whatever you say might be starting a conversation. But go ahead.
It's totally fine. Okay, let me start by saying, Matt, it's not true. And every new mayor blames their predecessor anywhere in the country. I think most listeners would acknowledge that's kind of par for the course. I'm going to point out that the city council, by law in New Jersey, has one responsibility and only one single responsibility. It's not constituent services, it's the budget. And James Solomon sat on the city council for 8 years himself. Now, I will also point out to you that he voted for nearly every single contract along the way and then would grandstand at the final budget. So that undermines the argument. I'll also point out to you that he has kept on his staff my business administrator, my head of economic development, my head of HR. His city council president ran with me for 8 years. So I think it undermines the credibility on that from a starting point. Also, I would tell you that the credit rating agencies, all of them still rate us as highly, highly investable credit rating. So, I think like when you think about it from a practical fact standpoint, I mean, it's all politics that he's playing over.
So Jersey City is facing a deficit. New York City is facing a deficit. But back to that quote that you gave Michael Hill, we had 8 years of no tax increases. We prioritized making the city affordable by not having tax increases. But if there's a big budget deficit, and this might apply to New York too, does that mean you undertaxed for Jersey City's needs?
No. So first of all, I said that there isn't that big budget gap that Mayor Solomon says. Okay, that's all politics, and I just gave you some basic common sense reasons on why that is. The reason we were able to keep taxes stable was because we had a revenue growth that eclipsed any expectation. The way that a municipality or a city has revenue growth in New Jersey, like Jersey City, is ratable growth from growing with new housing. And I think anybody can see what has happened in Jersey City because we've been unapologetically pro-growth, YIMBY, and maybe the standard bearer for that in the country. So from my standpoint, that is what contributed to the tax stability. And again, you look at the credit rating agencies, how they evaluate us today. Look at what Mayor Solomon, his track record over 8 years, and look at the fact who he's kept on his staff in leadership. If I was doing such a bad job, why would he keep all the leadership there in his leadership?
On what you said earlier about how to get to universal child care and including businesses providing child care for their employees as a main building block, listener writes, the problem with relying on employer-based child care is you lose it when you lose your job, and not all employers provide it. It also does not support the perspective that child care is public infrastructure. Your response?
I think there is some validity to that conversation. My point on what we do is not saying that it's the absolute answer, because across the 350 companies, a lot of them that offer childcare offer it in different ways. Some of it's a subsidy to lower income. Some of it's to all employees. Some of them have it on site. My point in sharing that was that, we have knowledge and experience in this space that few others have from a practical standpoint, from an experience standpoint. And we just want to be part of the conversation. I think it's fair to say that the child care issue is one that definitely impacts affordability for everybody. And we're happy that Governor Hochul's leaning into it, and Mayor Mamdani has brought that to the forefront. I think they deserve a lot of credit, and we want to be part of the solution.
One more call, and this one's going to set up where I think you and the mayor are actually very much aligned. Santiago in Brooklyn, you're on WNYC with Steve Fulop. Hello, Santiago.
Hi. So in this campaign, Mayor Mamdani mentioned Jersey City as an example of building more housing and how he would want to kind of follow that. Is there anything the partnership or yourself are advocating for specifically that the mayor could do on that, which could help add housing? And also, as a kind of an addition to that, would you advocate for some more look at regional housing growth, not just, in the city specifically, but, Westchester, Nassau, I know Jersey City, Newark, Hudson County, stuff of the sort. Thank you.
Thank you. Steve?
So I think that, first of all, I was appreciative that he held up Jersey City and Tokyo as examples of housing growth that we can replicate here. One thing that we did exceptionally well in Jersey City was create certainty around what the environment would look like in each area of the city. We tried to eliminate the politics, and that certainty led to more investment. I think that the mayor has done a very good job of articulating how he wants this to work and kind of creating guardrails, at least on the onset, and Capital could make a decision whether they want to go or don't want to go. I think you need to continue to upzone a lot of the areas, particularly around transit, and you need to be willing to push out the NIMBYs from that conversation, even if parts of that are for your political base. I think when we were growing the city in Jersey City, a lot of my initial political base that I got elected with left me because of some of the decisions I made, whether it was around abatements and incentives or rezoning. And I understood that to be a reality with regards to governing. Sometimes the people that get you elected, the activist base, is very, very good at getting you elected, but they're not very good at governing. And I think that's a balance that he's going to have to experience over some time and learn where he feels comfortable. But in order for housing to grow, certainty is important, and you're never going to be able to placate everybody. One other thing I would tell you is that in a perfect world, every housing project would be mixed income and 20 to 30% of affordable housing and would have different thresholds, low income and moderate income. It would be 100% union, and they negotiate with the community, some community givebacks. And when you actually will put pencil to paper, or you have outside people come in and look at the finances of these projects, they are tremendously tight. And without proper incentives, the math speaks to the fact that at some point, something has to give. You're never going to be able to accomplish all of those things. In Jersey City, we prioritized housing growth. That was the most important thing to me. People could criticize it, but I felt that more supply would level off rent. It's actually proven to be true. But I think he's going to have to make some choices because today he's looking for 100% affordable. He's looking for 100% union labor. He's looking for significant parts of affordable housing within those projects, community givebacks, and it's going to be hard to make those things pencil out without kind of willingness to compromise.
Steve Fulop, he was the mayor of Jersey City. Now he's the president and CEO of the Partnership for New York City. Thanks for this. We look forward to continuing the conversation as the Mamdani years progress. Thanks a lot, Steve.
Thank you.
It's the Brian Lehrer Show on WNYC. Good morning, everyone. We'll talk to the two directors of the New York Working Families Party to begin the show today. Why? Well, there's a lot going on this week that is very relevant to them and very relevant to many of you. In the New York State governor's race, did you hear this? They declined to endorse the progressive challenger who was primarying Governor Hochul. That was her Lieutenant Governor, Antonio Delgado. Within a day after the Working Families Party decided to stay out of that race, Delgado dropped out. The progressive candidate the Working Families Party backed in the New Jersey congressional primary this week has apparently won that race. Ana Lilia Mejia, who was the most progressive candidate in that multi-candidate field looking to succeed Mikey Sherrill there, is what they call Tin Cup Day in Albany. You know about Tin Cup Day? That's when the mayor of New York and others go in person to ask the state legislature to approve their agenda. In Mayor Mamdani's case, and backed by the Working Families Party, the mayor wants to increase taxes on the wealthiest New York individuals and corporations, as you know, to pay for universal child care and other affordability priorities. Now, on Monday's show, on that question, we heard an argument against those tax hikes from Steve Fulop, president of the Partnership for New York City. Yes, that's Steve Fulop, who used to be the Jersey City mayor, Democrat. Now he's president of the Partnership for New York City, which represents 300 major businesses in the city. Here's one of the ways Fulop made his case against Mamdani's call and his base's call to tax the rich.
The talking point that he had, Brian, was that we need to move New York tax rates on the corporate side to replicate New Jersey. And coincidentally, I have familiarity with both of those. currently, when you layer on all of the different taxes for corporations in New York, you are at 17%, which is marginally more than New Jersey already. If you replicate the tax rate for New Jersey, you would move New York City to 22% versus New Jersey staying at 11%. So all I said was that, at some point you hit a tripwire and people do make a decision to leave. If your taxes are 100% higher than you could have them a mile away, people are going to make that decision. It's not overnight, but some people will make that decision and it will be bad for New York.
Steve Fulop, president of the Partnership for New York City, the business group, here on Monday. So we'll hear the other side of that now. We'll talk about Hochul Delgado, Ana Lilia Mejia, Tin Cup Day in Albany, and maybe more. As I said, there's a lot going on this week that is very relevant to the Working Families Party. Jasmine Gripper and Ana Maria Archila are the co-directors of the New York Working Families Party, and they join me now. Welcome back to WNYC.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Brian.
Would you start by addressing Steve Fulop's argument in the clip, Mamdani's pitch to level up New York's corporate tax with New Jersey's would actually make the city's corporate taxes significantly more than New Jersey's, he says, not level, because of additional city taxes that already exist. Do you question the math, first of all, and do you question how that might affect companies' decisions about whether to stay or create new jobs here if they can be cheaper right across the river? To many people, that argument might sound like common sense.
Yes, it would sound like common sense if you don't understand who pays the corporate tax and how. So one, our corporate tax rate is only paid by corporations who net a profit of $1 million or more. So that already eliminates all of the small mom and pop businesses and struggling small businesses. This is the ultra-rich corporations who are netting huge profits. You pay New York's corporate tax rate not because you are based in New York. You pay New York's corporate tax rate if you do business in New York. And businesses like Amazon aren't leaving New York. They're not going to leave our market. It is too big of a sales market for them to go. So Amazon can absolutely afford to pay more in corporate taxes to New York State, and they are not going anywhere. And so being really clear that our corporate tax has nothing to do where an organization or a business is headquartered. It has all to do with if they do business in New York and they earn $1 million in profit or more. And so that's only taxing the ultra wealthy corporations and the ones who won't leave New York because they know they want to be here. This market is strong and they want to do business here. And we have no threat of them going anywhere. The rich always complain. They're going to leave, they're going to leave, they're going to leave. And guess what? They never leave. This is New York. They want to be here. This is the playground of the ultra wealthy. Corporations want to be here and do business in New York. And it's actually not going to threaten us at all.
But they could be in Jersey City. Fulop, the former mayor of Jersey City,
can be in Jersey
and still
City
be in the metro area.
And if you do business in New York, you pay New York's corporate tax rate. If there's it doesn't matter where you go. And so as long as you want to operate your business and sell in New York and do business with New Yorkers, you have to pay our corporate tax rate. It doesn't matter if you go across the river. You can be headquartered in Texas. You still can pay the New York corporate tax rate.
How far does that go? Let's say Amazon was headquartered in Texas, which I don't think it is, but let's just say. They ship, obviously, to a lot of New Yorkers because they're delivering to New Yorkers' addresses. They need to pay New Yorkers, New York's corporate tax rate?
Exactly. Yes. That is the way the bill is written. That's the way the law has been. And so I think, Steve Fulop is being misleading about businesses leaving. And we know it's untrue.
Steve Fulop. Yeah, here's one more Fulop clip from Monday's show where he argues that raising taxes wouldn't just ding the oligarchs. New York City's high taxes have already begun to deter job creation for regular working families. He says the 300 companies they represent, they may be a lot of the banks, et cetera, what you might think of as the oligarchy, the masters of the universe companies, but they have 800,000 workers in New York, and you want those jobs to stay, and you want them to bring more jobs. But here's what he said about that.
The biggest way to confront the affordability conversation is better jobs, which lead to better paychecks, okay? And you're not talking about the top 1%, you're talking across the board. When places like, use what you said earlier, let's say the oligarchs, and we classify them, but if you talk about their companies, let's say JP Morgan has more jobs for the first time in Texas than New York. Think about that. Goldman Sachs hasn't created a net job in New York for whatever, 7, 8 years, they say, right? Those things are indicators that you're not going to confront the affordability conversation if you're not creating more jobs for more people.
Jasmine or Anna Maria, your reaction to that?
You know, the wealthy and the well-connected want to constantly say we need to look out for them at the expense of the working class. And we know that's simply not true. The people who are leaving New York in droves, the people who can't afford to stay here, are the working class New Yorkers, and we need government to look out for them. We have to, let's be mindful that Trump already gave a permanent tax break to the wealthy. New Yorkers alone are getting New York's wealthy are getting a $12 billion tax reduction because of the Trump tax cuts. Not the working class, the ultra wealthy. This idea that we can't expect them to pay a little bit more so that the rest of us can thrive is actually completely unrealistic. They want to continue to sell us trickle-down economics when we know that that's failed year over year and time after time. What we need to do is invest in working class. We need to demand more from our corporations. We need to raise taxes on the ultra wealthy and the wealthy corporations in order for the city and the state to provide more for working class New Yorkers, who are the ones who are feeling pushed to the margins, who are the ones who can't be here, who are the ones who are leaving New York and can't fill jobs because they can't afford to live here. And so this idea that we have to handle the ultra rich with delicate white gloves is simply untrue. And we really need to push back against the scarcity mindset that there's not enough for everybody. We live in the wealthiest country in the world. We live in one of the wealthiest states. Budgets are about priorities. The ultra rich are thriving like never before. They have more money than they can even spend in a lifetime. It is okay for us to ask them to pay their fair share in order to have enough for everyone else to thrive.
But on the specific stats that he quoted there, for those two major investment companies, JP Morgan has more jobs for the first time in Texas than New York. Goldman Sachs hasn't created a net job in New York for 7 or 8 years.
Though that might be, I honestly don't know the facts around that, and that might be factually true. And jobs and industries are always shifting. New markets are emerging, and oftentimes new markets emerge here in New York. And so we're not at a shortage of jobs as much as we're dealing with a shifting globalized economy. Shifts happen. Yes, that's real. But that doesn't mean that New York is now all of a sudden falling behind on jobs overall.
One more thing on this, then we'll go to some of the other news. The actual stats for New York City job creation for last year came out recently, and they were kind of shockingly bad. It was only 30,000 something net jobs created last year, and just about all of them were in what's been described as, low-paying healthcare fields, especially home health aides. What does that tell you? And does there need to be a policy response to that?
I mean, we should be careful in New York that we have no low-wage paying jobs for any New Yorker, because how could you afford to live here if you're not making more? And so we really need to make sure every industry is paying workers a quality wage. And then we also need to examine how industries are coming to New York and doing business here. But we can't afford to continue to give tax breaks and tax giveaways. We have enough of those. And we really need everyone to come to New York to contribute equally to our economy.
All right. Now, listeners, if you are a Working Families Party member, any opinion about not endorsing Delgado against Hochul for a Democratic primary? We're going to talk about that next. 212-433-WNYC. For anyone else, now that we've had 2 views this week of the case for and against higher taxes on certain corporations, and the highest income individuals in New York City is part of that, although that wasn't in the particular exchange we played. Does anyone want to weigh in with a reaction? Did you get swayed by either side, or do you have a question? 212-433 WNYC 212-433-9692. Call or text. Any Ana Lilia Mejia voters on that apparent primary win for a progressive WFP-backed candidate to succeed Mikey Sherrill in Congress in Jersey, or anything else for Jasmine Gripper and Ana Maria Archila, the co-directors of the New York Working Families Party, 212-433-WNYC, 212-433-9692. All right, next topic. After Mamdani's win as the progressive in the mayoral race, Lieutenant Governor Antonio Delgado decided to primary Governor Hochul from the left. This week, you at the Working Families Party declined to endorse Delgado, as you had endorsed Mamdani. You didn't endorse either. And poof, Delgado dropped out within a day. Why did you make that decision not to endorse?
So the Working Families Party has always been focused on using the power of our party to advance an agenda that improves the lives of workers and their families. That is what motivates every political decision we make. That's what animates everything that we do in kind of the daily life of the party. And as we assessed the two candidates, we saw obviously Governor Hochul showing a real willingness to listen to the more than 1 million voters who in New York City voted for Mayor Mamdani and who demanded access to childcare and real progress towards universal childcare. We saw the huge commitment that she made on childcare early, the first week of this year. We also saw her moving on immigration in a moment when we really need our state government to step up its commitment and to protect immigrant New Yorkers from Trump's deportation machine. Those two things, those two very concrete policy decisions that she made early this year really signaled to our party, the members of our party, that the governor was listening and listening to our priorities. On the other hand, we also saw Lieutenant Governor Delgado's campaign run a very spirited campaign to lift up a vision of the state that really prioritizes workers and their families, that talks about access to universal childcare and healthcare and affordable housing. But as the party assessed, and the party has a very robust internal democracy, this decision was made by a body of 200 people from across the state. Ultimately, our members decided that that both, Delgado's campaign was an incredibly sort of important contribution to the conversation, and Governor Hochul's position indicated that we should really continue to build a relationship with her to advance this agenda. And so the decision that ultimately was made was to not endorse either candidate, but instead do a technical designation called a placeholder, so that we indicate we are going to have a candidate for governor, but at this moment we are not making an endorsement.
I'm curious if you were coordinating at all with Mayor Mamdani, who endorsed Hochul last week. As you know, here's the mayor on the show last Thursday as he was rolling this endorsement out.
On day 8 of our administration, Ryan, I stood with Governor Hochul on stage in our city to announce more than $1 billion in funding from the state to deliver universal childcare. And as I was sharing with you earlier, this is the kind of cost that pushes working families out of the city. And that was a commitment that not only fixes the childcare we provide for 3-year-olds to ensure that it can meet the demand of every 3-year-old, but also delivers, for the first time in New York City history, childcare for every 2-year-old.
So was the mayor's endorsement a reason for you? Did you know it was coming in advance? Did you actually coordinate on this? How did that go?
Well, obviously the mayor's endorsement is an incredibly important signal that there is a sort of coalescing around the governor. That was an important factor in our decision. We, communicate with the mayor's team on a regular basis, and obviously we are very committed to helping advance the agenda that the mayor ran on. So childcare, freezing the rent, delivering on the buses, making sure that we put in place an approach to safety that is humane, access to food that is affordable for everybody. So all of these elements are priorities of us, and we, of course, looked at the mayor's public endorsement of the governor as a really important element that would shape how we would approach the election. Quite frankly, as you think about challenging the most powerful person in the state, the governor, you have to assess the power of that challenge. And if we have, let's imagine, the Working Families Party supporting the challenger, Lieutenant Governor Delgado, and the standard bearer of the left saying we should support the governor, both messages are going to be incoherent and confusing to voters. And ultimately, the question was, will that help us deliver on the agenda? And at the end of the day, the members of our party, after a very robust debate, our convention was an incredibly robust debate, not a coronation. Our members decided that we needed to not endorse the challenger in this moment and actually keep our options open.
Here are a couple of texts that are coming in on this question. One more supportive. I'm a Working Families Party member and I'm torn. I appreciated Delgado's message and felt he could put pressure on Hochul to raise taxes on the wealthy and provide greater support for Mamdani's agenda, but I understand the danger of burning political capital when Hochul looks as powerful as ever, and she seems to be somewhat open to working with progressives. That's one text. Another one says, I think that the Working Family Party decision to not endorse in the governor's race was a nail in the coffin of Delgado's campaign. I understand if they didn't want to endorse a candidate that didn't have a pathway to win, but we need to encourage primaries, especially when we have a governor who is a Democrat in name only. So you may not accept that Democrat in name only characterization of Hochul, but that second text is emphasizing the importance of primaries, which we will not now have. What's your reaction to that?
Yeah, no, we absolutely believe that primaries are important. The Working Families Party is constantly engaging in primary challenges to Democrats who fail to listen or fail to use their power in service of working families across the state. We believe in primaries. And we also believe that at the end of the day, we have to use our power responsibly to accomplish what we set out to accomplish, which is to change the circumstances of people's lives. And the reality is that in New York, we have an incredibly acute affordability crisis. That's what motivated people to go out to vote in historic numbers last year and to vote for Mayor Mamdani and for mayors in Buffalo and Syracuse and Albany and across the state. And we believe that sometimes primaries are the ways that you elevate an agenda. That's the way that you create leverage. And sometimes they sort of exhaust the resources and the energy. Sometimes they demonstrate that there is an enough, like a big enough coalition. And quite frankly, as we looked at this election, some of those were the questions that ultimately shaped our decision. Is Antonio Delgado going to break through, even though he has been running for 6 or 7 months? Is the agenda that we are trying to advance going to actually gain momentum with a challenge, or do we turn our attention to doing the pressure, the other forms of pressure that are available to us and that are important and that we continue to do? You just heard Jasmine make the case about why it is so important to tax corporations and the rich, and we are not stopping that work. Quite frankly, we are actually using our leverage to both challenge Democrats in the state assembly and make sure that we protect the congressional seats that we won last year, make sure that we use our energy to win more congressional seats for Democrats in November, and do all the work that the party does every day to both protect our democracy and win concrete improvements in people's lives.
And with Jasmine Gripper and Ana Maria Archila, co-directors of the New York Working Families Party, Jim in Flatbush, you're on WNYC. Hello, Jim.
Hi, thanks for taking my call. I just had a question. How does the party expect to do it, tax the rich, increase revenue without Delgado, without that pressure on the governor? Like, I think it's kind of a pipe dream to think that Hochul is going to be, compliant. I think the reason she was working with progressives was because of that pressure. And I think that despite, whether Delgado would win or not, like having a good primary would have provided some sort of leverage. I don't think you have the leverage now.
Jim, are you critical of Mayor Mamdani in the same way?
I think
for his endorsement.
Absolutely. Yes, I am. I think that it's a mistake to believe that the current landscape is going to last. Like I don't think
mm-hmm.
the mayor retains that sort of glow
leverage?
from the election forever.
The glow. Jim, thank you. Ana Maria, Jasmine, how do you react to Jim?
Yeah, thank you for your question, Jim. Mayor Mamdani is in Albany right now testifying before the state legislature and making the case for why we need to raise taxes on the ultra rich in order to help the budget of New York City and really help New Yorkers thrive. The governor is not by herself the sole determiner of the state budget. We have the Assembly and the Senate as well. This is not the first time we're dealing with a governor who has been against raising taxes. We've faced this before when Andrew Cuomo was governor of New York, and we needed to raise taxes and raise revenue. And in that moment, the legislature helped to deliver. And so, there is a coalition in Albany today, in addition to the mayors being there for Tin Cup Day, but the Invest in Our New York coalition and WFP members are in Albany today advocating for the Assembly and the Senate to be strong in their demands to raise revenue in the state budget and to pressure Hochul to deliver and comply with those demands. And so we are still fighting. Elections and primaries are one tool in our toolbox. It's not the only tool in our toolbox. And we've leveraged pressure before to move a governor from not wanting to raise taxes to raising taxes. Andrew Cuomo was actually the last governor who raised the personal income tax rate and the corporate tax rate to its existing amount due to a high pressure campaign on him. And so and it wasn't during an election year. And so we will continue to put pressure on the governor. And we will also leverage our relationships with the legislature in Albany to help deliver more revenue. We are in a moment where the state budget absolutely needs revenue. They need more resources. They can either balance the budget on the backs of working families, or they can balance the budget on the backs of the ultra rich and the billionaires. And I think that's an important question that the legislature is not taking lightly.
Brian, can I say one thing
Please.
I really appreciate Jim's question, because that was precisely the kind of conversation that we had at our convention. One of the things that the Working Families Party is for New Yorkers is kind of the political expression that tries to advance an agenda, and the political party that is perceived and is experienced by New Yorkers as the point of leverage with their powerful government in Albany and across the state. So this was, that question was at the center of our convention. The question of how do we what have we learned from the lessons of previous elections, previous years when the party has challenged the governor and come short? What has been the impact of those decisions? And that's what the Working Families Party is as a space for people, everyday New Yorkers, to come and actually say, how do we use our collective power to improve our lives? And it was questions like that ultimately got really debated and discussed in our convention, and in the days leading up to the convention. And ultimately the body of the state committee made a decision that to sort of drive us forward.
Listener writes, Ana Maria is making it seem like Hochul supporting universal child care and her support of some immigrant protections is enough. What Hochul is proposing does not go far enough. Listener writes, she is only funding universal child care for 2-year-olds, and the immigrant protections aren't anywhere close to what is being proposed in the New York for All bill. So on that, Anna Maria, or even the question, if Hochul is standing with Mamdani on universal child care for 2-year-olds, it's not universal because it doesn't start at 6 months like the mayor wants, but she seems to be saying they can do that much without a tax increase. So does that negate the necessity for a tax increase to any degree, in your opinion, if the governor is saying we can start with this big piece, childcare for 2-year-olds, without it?
I think the commitment that the mayor made to New Yorkers is to deliver universal childcare. And because New Yorkers showed up in such huge numbers and sent such a resounding message, he was able to negotiate very early on with the governor for a very significant investment. Is it everything? Of course not. Is it universal and permanent? No, we still have to win that. And that is why the tax fight is so, so important. And I want to, I come from the immigrant rights movement. That's how I understood that this country was my home. And I know that the windows of the openings to advance pro-immigrant policies always open and close very quickly. And we pushed the governor very hard to make sure that she would use the window that opened up in the national debate to use her power to put in place some protections. The thing that she did was to cancel this thing called the 287G agreements, which are contracts between counties and ICE to deputize local police and provide local jails. And so by canceling those contracts, that will make it much, much harder for ICE to operate in the counties where those contracts were in place. Now, is it everything? Absolutely not. Do we need to keep pushing for more because we need New York for all? Absolutely, yes. But for anyone who says that this is nothing, I respectfully disagree. And as someone who has been in this movement, I understand how hard fought these victories are. And obviously, the proof will be in the pudding of when people are dropping off their 2-year-old to a childcare center that did not exist before or that existed and cost $20,000 a year. People will experience a significant relief in their life, and that will make it more possible for them to be able to breathe easy as they live in New York City and call this state their home.
We'll continue in a minute with the co-directors of the New York Working Families Party. There's more to get to, including the victory yesterday of the progressive candidate in the New Jersey Congressional District in that primary to succeed Mikey Sherrill. More of your calls and texts. Stay with us.
I am proud to support her reelection. And in this moment, this is a governor who has chosen to govern with the needs of working people in mind. And that is exactly what we have to deliver in what has now become the most expensive city in the United States of America.
Mayor Mamdani here last Thursday endorsing Governor Hochul for re-election, including in her primary against her challenger from the left, Antonio Delgado, the lieutenant governor, who is now dropped out. As we continue with Jasmine Gripper and Anna Maria Achila, the co-directors of the New York Working Families Party, and Jake in Midtown. You're on WNYC. Hi, Jake.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Brian.
What you got?
So, real quick, I just wanted to say, without getting too much in the weeds on numbers, I really want to push back on Mr. Fulop's position of cherry-picked details about jobs for J.P. Morgan leaving to Texas, which isn't just J.P. Morgan, to be clear. It's Wells Fargo and a number of other banks, too, that are all moving to Texas.
And let me just say for listeners who didn't hear that clip, which was a half hour ago now, Steve Fulop, who now is the CEO of the Partnership for New York City, which represents banks and other big businesses, arguing against a corporate tax increase in New York and pointing to as evidence J.P. Morgan and what was the other big bank? J.P. Morgan Chase
Fargo,
and Goldman Sachs was the one he mentioned.
Goldman.
Not creating any new jobs in years in New York and rather creating new jobs in Texas in J.P. Morgan's case. So on that, Jake, go ahead.
So it's a fallacy, I think, to say it's about the corporate tax rate. I mean, Texas has no income tax rate for corporations, but those jobs started to leave during the pandemic when everyone started to work from home. And the reason they're not coming back now has much more to do with AI. Their shift last year, which was in several financial articles, to Texas is a temporary shift for temporary positions, effectively, because even in January, the CEO of JP Morgan, without giving exact numbers, said he's going to be shifting away from all of these employees over the next 5 years for AI. So it's sort of a fallacy to say that, like, the income tax rate is what's driving people out of New York, when really we have to think about the broader issue of, like, how are these people going to employ human beings in the future as they eliminate jobs in general, especially a lot of these coding and engineering jobs that they're trying to open up in Texas. And for us in New York here, that matters boots on the ground because, like she said, we're still going to be getting their income tax if we pass this bill because they're still doing business here. And I live just outside the city in Ana Lilia's new prospective district if Ms. Mejia wins. And my wife worked on Mejia's campaign, and we're very excited. And in the same way she needs to address these issues in New Jersey for us, I want to address these issues for New Yorkers and ask the ladies, I love the Working Families Party. What are we doing with this bill and with future bills to also create some sort of guardrails against the complete loss of jobs for AI in the future, in the next 5 years?
Jake, thank you for your call.
Thank you.
We appreciate it. You want to take on that question, Jasmine, Ana Maria, AI regulation, and does Hochul, does Mamdani, does the legislature have a position on it?
Yeah, thank you, Jake, for that question. Thank you for you and your wife, helping get Ana Lilia over the finish line and voting for her. She's going to be a great addition to Congress. And bringing up those great points that, like, we are living in an economy in a world that is ever shifting because of AI and its presence, and it's not going to disappear. So we have to learn how to live with it. We have to learn how to protect New Yorkers and protect jobs. One of the things that the Working Families Party is doing and that we announced and launched at the end of last year is some new guarantees that, like, all New Yorkers need some new guarantees from our government. We need guaranteed access to childcare. We need guaranteed access to a home we can afford. And we need guaranteed access to healthcare we can rely on. And we need New York to be a place where immigrants are welcomed. And so we really need our government to look out for us and to protect New Yorkers as our economy changes and grows. And then we also need to put some guardrails on how AI is being used, what people can use AI for, and create and have some job protections. I want to be honest that this is a ever-changing, emerging field, and the information here is still new. And so I don't think we have all of the solutions just yet. But it is something we're keeping an eye on, and we're working with other partners who are paying even closer attention to this. I know NYCLU has a number of bills in the state legislature around regulating AI and its use in ways that we protect people's data and information. And so we also need to figure out how it relates to protecting people's jobs and income, and again, making sure that everyone still has access to the things that they need. But our economy is absolutely shifting.
And NYCLU being the New York Civil Liberties Union. On the Mejia primary victory in NJ11, I know you're Working Families Party of New York co-directors. This was in New Jersey, backed by the Working Families Party there, but maybe you can give us a comment. She got a plurality, not a majority of the votes. Does that kind of primary, when a progressive wins, signal vulnerability against Republicans in November? If not in that particular pretty blue district in Jersey, then around the country generally?
Well, first, I want to say how excited we are about Ana Lilia's victory. Ana Lilia is someone who came into this role of a candidate after more than 20 years of a very powerful work history. She used to lead the Working Families Party in New Jersey. And in that role, she led the fight to increase the minimum wage, to pass paid sick days. She went on to, be the political director of Bernie Sanders' campaign in 2020, and now leads a national organization that has been waging many of the fights against Trump. So she's someone that comes with, like, a demonstrated history of fighting for people. And so even though she entered the race late, She was the last to enter, and she had very little name recognition. When she spoke to people, people understood how she had already impacted their lives, and that is what made a huge difference. Plus, a people-powered campaign that, much like Mamdani's campaign, focused on talking to voters directly. One of the things that happened in that race is that AIPAC tried to confuse voters. They poured in millions of dollars to sort of punish Malinowski for not being, kind of hawkish enough. Exactly, and it backfired. And so, what we read in this moment is one that like voters are very open to candidates who actually show up with a history of fighting for them. Voters are very open to people they don't know, but whose trajectory gives them confidence that they're not going to be sort of bending the knee to donors and to kind of the oligarchs that already control so much of our democracy, and that voters are open to these kind of profile of a candidate, not just in a city like New York, but in the suburbs, in Montclair and in Passaic and in this part of New Jersey that is not like a bastion of progressivism. And I think for Democrats, the working, we believe Democrats should be more like working families Democrats, more like Ana Lilia, people who actually can very clearly and very succinctly show whose side they are on. Are they on the side of the rich that are always threatening to leave if they don't get more goodies? Or are they on the side of the moms who need affordable childcare, of the workers who need buses that are, moving efficiently, of the people who need to be able to afford their rent? And Ana Lilia embodies that commitment, and that is why she was the one that ultimately broke through, came all the way from behind, and broke through in this very competitive special election in New Jersey. And we are extremely excited to see her and extremely proud that she is a working families Democrat.
Before we run out of time, I want to ask you about the contrast between your Working Families Party position on Governor Hochul, which you've been articulating, and the DSA, the Democratic Socialists of America New York chapter, of course, more prominent now after their influence on Mamdani's election. And the DSA issued a statement after Mamdani's Hochul endorsement last week. It began like this: NYC DSA does not believe that Governor Kathy Hochul has risen to meet this moment in which working people face unprecedented threats. As governor, she has consistently sided with her billionaire donors while offering working-class New Yorkers crumbs. So is the DSA more consistent on sticking to its values, and the WFP is more like just the progressive flank of the mainstream Democratic Party?
I would say that DSA, first of all, let me just say, we love and admire DSA and appreciate the clarity and the force that they are in offering a space, especially for young people, to kind of use kind of their collective power. And nothing in that statement is something we fundamentally kind of disagree with. In terms of like our critiques of the governor are similar. She has often sided with the wealthiest New Yorkers. We believe that there is something kind of about her politics that is very different from our politics. But the role of the Working Families Party is to actually build a governing majority. And that, by definition, requires working with people from the left and people from the center. And the reason why we say we are focused on building a governing majority is because it is through a majority that we can actually advance an agenda that makes a difference in people's lives. So it is super important to have voices like DSA and some of the DSA electeds, the socialists in office, who sort of hold up the long-term vision, but we see it as our responsibility to actually struggle with the things that are, with the middle, with the gray zone, and to figure out how to bring people along, not just the ones that are already very clearly kind of have a worldview and an ideology that is described as, democratic socialism, But the ones who say, I don't identify with any of those labels, but I definitely want to be able to afford the rent, and I definitely need childcare for my children. And the party is a party that is focused on that. So we work with DSA a lot, obviously, as we worked to develop a strategy that would allow us to keep our side together in the primary election for mayor. DSA was very much at the table, as were many kind of stripes of Democrats, labor Democrats, liberal Democrats. And we together worked and held our coalition. And now, as we move into this next phase of New York, where we have a Mayor Mamdani in New York City and we have a Governor Hochul, it is the Working Families Party that can actually kind of bridge the spectrum, and we see it as our responsibility to do so.
Ana Maria Artila and Jasmine Gripper, co-directors of the New York Working Families Party. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
Thank
you. This week on the New Yorker Radio Hour, reporter Julie K. Brown on the millions of files the government released on Jeffrey Epstein.
I think in some ways this raises more questions and makes the public more distrustful. It was supposed to be an act of transparency, and I don't see it as that, quite frankly.
Julie K. Brown on the Epstein files and what Donald Trump knew. That's all in the New Yorker Radio Hour from WNYC. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
It's the Brian Lehrer Show on WNYC. Welcome back, everybody. I'm Kusha Navidar, filling in for Brian today. So if you have a car that's ever been towed in the city, odds are you've interacted with a little-known black market industry, illegal towing. Unauthorized tow truck companies have been operating in the city for decades, and the scam basically looks like this. Unlicensed tow truck drivers will rush to the scene of a crash, haul your car to their repair shop, inflate the cost of the damages, and defraud insurance companies to win big payouts. And by big, I mean like tens of thousands of dollars per vehicle sometimes. But insurance companies are by no means the only victims of these scams. First off, there's a street safety issue. Competing tow truckers essentially race each other to be the first on the scene of a crash, recklessly speeding through residential neighborhoods on the way. A man died a couple of years after being swiped by one of these trucks zipping through a quiet intersection in Queens. There's also been a culture of violence within the industry. Last week, the owner of a South Bronx auto body shop was sentenced to 19 years in prison for killing the owner of a rival shop over a turf dispute. And yet the city has dialed back enforcement in recent years, allowing the number of unlicensed tow trucks to skyrocket. At this point, there are actually now more illegal tow trucks operating in the city than legal ones. Liam Quigley is a reporter at Gothamist WNYC, and he recently published a huge investigation into the illegal towing industry and why the city has had so much trouble cracking down on it. Liam, welcome to the show.
Hey, how are you?
Good. So nice to have you here. Really excited to talk about this. You've been covering this illicit industry for years, and you just published this big story giving a detailed layout of the landscape and of this industry. And as I was reading it, I was wondering, why now? Like, what information came out that makes this story so timely, given that it's been an issue for decades?
This was really something that I figured out in the past few months, drilling into the data of all these speed and red light cameras that are all over the city, and kind of saying, okay, is there a way we can see, are they picking up tow trucks? Because tow trucks are issued, if they're properly registered with the state, they have a tow truck designation. So we have a big list of speed camera tickets, and I've asked the city for years, each year, to show me the list of licensed tow truck plates, because the city does license, if things are done correctly, you're on that list. So I compared those two lists and found that there were 700 trucks absent from the licensed list. So that's the ghost fleet of unlicensed tow trucks that are running red lights.
Those 700.
700, yeah.
And how does that compare to the wider tow truck, not a population, but just
Right.
inventory that there is?
Back in 2019 or 2017, 2018, there were around 1,200 licensed tow trucks. That number has really dropped to where it's roughly on par with the unlicensed industry, but we're also not even talking about tow trucks that don't have tow truck plates at all. They have passenger plates, Pennsylvania plates, Florida plates, no license plates. And we've tracked dozens of those trucks all around the city as well.
Wow. Listeners, we want to hear from you. Have you ever been towed by one of these illegal trucks and have a story to share? Maybe you've seen some of these trucks barreling down your streets and want to voice your concern. Or do you have questions for Liam about what these scams look like, how to avoid them? Or maybe you're thinking, wait, was I a victim of one of these scams and didn't even realize it? Perhaps you even drive one of these trucks and want to chime in or explain something about the industry that we might be missing. We're here to hear from you. We're taking your calls and your texts. 212-433-WNYC. That's 212-433-9692. Give us a call, send us a text. So, as you said, you've crunched the numbers for this investigation and found that there's been a massive boom in the industry over the past several years. What factors go into that boom?
Yeah, I started noticing that there seemed to be more unlicensed trucks on the streets, and I was looking for a way to quantify that feeling that you get as a reporter when you're in Canarsie and you're seeing that truck doesn't have any identifying information on it. It doesn't even have the right medallion that licensed trucks are supposed to have in the city, and they're obviously engaged in towing work. So that's kind of, and what we ended up finding is in 2020, there was a big change in NYPD policy where they stopped responding to a lot of crashes without injuries. And in that vacuum, it
people
seems
found an opportunity.
Right, because the police are the ones who, when they spot an unlicensed truck, can take action. And then even adding to that, a couple years later, the police changed their policy and made it so officers are not able to immediately seize an unlicensed tow truck when they see one. That's because NYPD says there was a federal lawsuit and city council legislation that kind of restricted their ability to summarily seize an unlicensed tow truck.
I see. So a lot of things going on, but there's a power vacuum, kind of like what you said, and people saw an opportunity to kind of make a profit off of it. Let's talk about the enforcement efforts, which you kind of alluded to right there. In 2017, the former Manhattan District Attorney Cy Vance announced a major bust that he said would put an end to the industry. You also described the former city council member Bob Holden as being kind of obsessed with this issue. He was gunning for tougher regulation throughout his 6 years in the council. But as we just heard, the rules have actually been loosened over the same period of time, and the industry is booming. So can you tell me about some of these efforts and how they failed or were abandoned? What's going on?
Yeah, the efforts to regulate New York City's towing industry go back decades. I mean, there were even protests on the street in Brooklyn after chasers, racing through the streets, hit and killed and seriously injured people. So there were big reforms put into place around 87 to divide the city into zones, start making it so, the police come to the scene of the crash. It's like, no, we decide who tows your car, and you have to be on that list, and you have to be licensed. And it's always been a struggle. I mean, the city agency that oversees the industry has just around 62 inspectors with, they cannot arrest you, they cannot stop a vehicle, they're unarmed. So it's something the city's really struggled to fully get its hands around for a long time.
Yeah, so you're describing bureaucratic bottlenecks in some sense, right?
Yeah.
Of saying who has responsibility or authority. And in that, there is a challenge as to responding timely, and that's where the power vacuum comes from. Is that a fair kind of 10,000-foot view of it?
Yeah, I mean, look, the inspectors from the Department of Consumer and Worker Protection are also tasked with so many other things in the city, like the scale at the supermarket, the quality of your gasoline, and, dozens of other industries. Throughout their regulation of the tow truck industry, it's remained one of the most complained about industries. And in court filings, lawyers for that agency have said that the schemes in the tow truck industry, licensed and unlicensed, had become, quote, increasingly more brazen. And that was in 2019. And that they're always trying to, the tow truck industry is always trying to stay a step ahead of regulators.
Listeners, we're taking your calls about the tow truck industry in New York City and this kind of phantom fleet that is operating illegally. We've got Gerald in Somerset, New Jersey. Hey, Gerald, welcome to the show.
Thank you. You said in your introduction that the insurance companies are getting defrauded, but they're not the only ones getting defrauded. And I wondered how they could be defrauded when their adjuster, I would think, the first question they would ask when they get to this illegitimate body shop, where's your registration?
So, Gerald, let me make sure I'm hearing you correctly. Your question is, how could they be defrauded if it would be so easy to verify?
Yeah.
Yeah. Liam, what do you think?
We've looked at licensed body shops that have been accused of charging really high storage fees, for example. The repairs don't get done, and the car owners are left without their vehicle for months. And then, they're in possession of the vehicle. It can be very tough going there. I mean, I talked to a woman in Brooklyn who she ended up going to small claims court just to try to recoup a little bit of the money she says was owed to her by this body shop. As last I checked with her, she didn't receive any of that cash. That body shop was later shut down by the NYPD. So certainly there's elements of consumers being taken advantage of here.
Let's go to Gogo in the Bronx. Hey, Gogo, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. My complaint is that back in 22, I had a minor fender bender with a car that I've long since gotten rid of. The car wasn't worth fixing, so I asked one of the chasers, two of them had showed up, if they can just tow it to my house because I have a fairly large yard. And they both flat out refused. They said, it has to go to the shop. It has to go to the shop. There's this damage, that damage, stuff that to the naked eye, you couldn't really see. But I really didn't care because, again, the car was on its last legs anyway. But I just found it odd that I offered cash to tow it to my house, less than a mile away, and they both just refused.
Oh, Gogo, I'm sorry to hear that you had that experience. Thank you so much for sharing it. Sounds like a lot of people have that experience, right?
Yeah, it's important to look, if you're dealing with unlicensed tow trucks, you're in another realm entirely. But licensed trucks that show up to the scenes of crashes in New York City are you're supposed to be able to get towed to any location in the 5 boroughs, at your request. You're not obligated to go to a specific body shop. Like that's in the tower's, tow truck bill of rights for consumers. But obviously there's a lot of complaints in this industry about, just like we just heard, that rules are not being followed.
Yeah. Speaking of going around rules, I want to touch on one more point to what we were discussing before about why some of these crackdowns haven't worked. And I want to talk specifically about bribery, because you also reported that public officials have actually been threatened or bribed when they try to crack down on illegal towing. Are those the main things that are stopping the city from getting a handle on the problem? Where does corruption play into this?
I should clarify that we haven't reported that that public officials have been bribed to look the other way at the industry, around the industry as a whole. But there have been a couple high-profile cases of NYPD officers who were accused of being complicit with tow truck companies / body shops to steer crash victims to their preferred, to their cooperators.
Thanks for clarifying that.
And that's an ongoing issue that police oversight agencies have kind of tabulated over the years, because it's common enough that it continues to happen. But I did talk to going back to Bob Holden, that official you mentioned earlier in the show. He's kind of been on a mission while he was a city council member.
6-year mission, kind of, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And he told me that he was threatened for taking photos of chased trucks, those illegal tow trucks parked on sidewalks, or confronting tow truck drivers who were at the scenes of crashes that they weren't supposed to be at. And then going back to that agency we were talking about, the Department of Consumer and Worker Protection, officials there told me that one of their attorneys left the job because when they were working on the tow truck industry, they believe they were followed by a tow truck near their home.
And these are just folks that are saying it. I mean, I'm guessing it's hard to gauge what the actual impact is, but you have seen evidence.
In terms of
this corruption or threatening happening.
Oh yeah, I mean it's it goes back to that brazenness that DCWP was the Consumer Protection Agency was talking about in court filings, and that was in 2019 when in the licensed industry they said that fraud was so widespread that they moved to revoke a quarter of all licensed companies. It's kind of on both sides here. The licensed and unlicensed industries are both challenging to regulate.
Yeah, and I want to put a point on what you're talking about with the Department of Consumer Protection. I find it very telling that you're saying they're in charge of a lot of different things and their hands are full. So there's definitely a capacity issue. At the same time, there does seem to be threats. Like there's a lot in this stew that is making it hard to crack down. And, we got a text that just came in that leads me to another question. The text reads, does the city lose money from illegal towing? Are there fees paid to the city by the legal tow companies? Can you explain that?
Well, I can say that certainly when our calculation, this didn't make it into the story that you can read on Gothamist.com, but I actually calculated how much money is owed by the unlicensed industry in parking fines, and it's in the thousands and thousands. I think it's over $100,000. Wow. Which is it's a drop in the bucket for the city.
Yeah.
But certainly there's a cost of the public safety risk, like the injuries, the fatal hit and runs. I think that alone is a huge cost.
And former Mayor Eric Adams was also involved in a sprawling tow truck scandal, right?
Yes, he was among his portfolio of those kinds of issues. Mayor Eric Adams was caught up in something involving tow truck companies in Brooklyn, including one who it was alleged was trying to bribe their way to a better contract for serving the city's highways, which can be very lucrative. So there's kind of a tow truck story, in every borough.
In every borough, yeah. Let's go to Vicky in Tudor City. Hi, Vicky. Welcome to the show.
Oh, good morning. I want to thank this journalist for his efforts. So is there a specific question you could ask a tow truck driver? Are they legal or illegal? I mean, if you can only tell by the license plate, and the average person doesn't know what to look for, what can you ask, and can you wait for a legal one once they disclose they're not legal?
Great question, Vicky. Liam, do you have any sense of that?
Yeah, much like, taxis have medallions, licensed tow trucks have medallions, which should be on the left side of the vehicle. It's about the size of a sheet of paper, blue with white numbers on it. You should definitely look out for that. You should be very careful about anyone who shows up at a crash scene without having been asked to be there. And tow trucks are supposed to have company names on them and a phone number and the rates for their services. So those are definitely things you should want to see on a tow truck. But if you're looking at for example, a pickup truck with dark tinted windows with Pennsylvania plates and a towing rig sticking out from under the rear of the bed of the truck, that's, not a licensed truck, at least not with the city. So the DCWP, again, that Consumer Protection Agency, they put out towing tips that you can read on their website. We also did a story about some of these tips, which you can check out on Gothamist.com in addition to the original main tow truck story.
And that'll give you some steps that you can use in case you're ever in the situation where you actually have to figure out, is this legitimate and what to do about it. Okay, let's talk about Chung Lun Shao, who's the man who was hit by one of these illegal trucks and tragically ultimately died. I wonder how common these kinds of cases are. Have there been other instances of traffic violence that you know about?
Yeah, absolutely. We tracked fatal crashes involving licensed and unlicensed tow trucks in New York City going back to 2010. And we found 15 fatal crashes. Wow. This one you just brought up was in 2023. That involved a truck that was not licensed to do towing work in New York City. And there's been, 2 further in the Bronx that police described as being unlicensed tow trucks one was a hit and run. And in my work, I even found a fatal crash involving a tow truck that was never reported in the news, which in New York City is very uncommon for there to be a fatal crash without the media learning about it.
Yeah.
So,
and you're talking from 2010 to
2010.
Yeah. So, and you said 15. So that's about one a year that is losing a life from this practice.
Yeah, that we're aware of.
Yeah.
Kind of the characteristics of some of these unlicensed trucks make it so, you might not realize that it's a tow truck unless you kind of know what you're looking for. So
it's at least.
It's at least.
Yeah.
It's definitely at least. I was surprised to have found that one that never was reported. So
yeah.
Yeah.
In the case of Chung-Lun Shao, it turns out the man who hit him, Filippo Benura, was actually operating with a suspended license and has ties to the mob. His criminal case was ultimately dismissed. Is this sort of thing common, that people in this industry can avoid accountability in criminal cases? And if so, why?
It's tough. I mean, even when we're talking about fatal crashes involving vehicles, generally speaking, in New York City, it can be tough to prosecute drivers. I mean, that's why Mr. Benura was charged. I believe it's just failure to yield and driving with a suspended license. His attorney in that case said this crash had nothing to do with his work as a tow truck driver. And yeah, it's tough. I mean, tow truck drivers who have their license revoked can simply reapply after a few years. So it can be tough to keep bad actors out of the industry.
We're getting a lot of texts about this. Here's one that I would love to read. The racing of tow trucks through city streets reminds me of emergency vehicles racing through city streets. None of it is safe. And this text is coming from a retired New York City paramedic, not pandemic, a New York City paramedic. Liam, the drive-by shooting that you reported on was tragic. Can you tell me a little bit more about that incident? Maybe elaborate on the criminal component of all this? I don't think it's a stretch to say that the towing industry could be likened in some ways to organized crime rings. That's what it feels like.
That was the position of federal prosecutors who, like you're saying, just last week found this Bronx tow truck company owner being sentenced to 19 years in prison in a scheme that they say was over rival turf in the Bronx, where many of the tow truck workers were armed, and things escalated after a crash. It's actually one of the unlicensed trucks was being driven in the Bronx and was involved in a crash in supposedly rival territory, and that worker convinced the victim of the crash that they had gotten into the crash with to come back to their shop. And there was a fight over that, and that escalated to, it was really a drive-by that turned into a shootout because, according to the prosecutors, both groups were carrying firearms. So that really blew up in a big way with these two groups of unlicensed tow trucks workers fighting.
Yeah. Let's go to Miroslav in Lake Como, New Jersey. Hi, Miroslav. Welcome to the show.
Oh, good morning. I'm a retired police officer from New York City, and interest of full disclosure, it's been 22 years since I retired. So my question and my comment is, what happened to the roto policy that was strictly enforced? And for your listeners, as a police officer, if I responded to a motor vehicle accident, I had no say in which company was allowed to tow. Our radio dispatcher had a list that he or she would rotate through, and whoever was next on the list had 30 minutes to respond to the accident, and if they didn't make it in 30 minutes, it automatically went to the next company on the list. If an unauthorized or somebody who wasn't in the rotation responded, we were required to write them a citation. I think it was called a LD6. So I'm wondering what happened to that.
Thank you so much for that call, Miroslav. So roto policy, Liam, what happened to it?
Remember that 2020 issue we're talking about with the big reduction in response to crashes?
Yeah.
There's no police officer at the crash. They can't issue an LD6 summons. But yes, those roto and DARP, they still exist. Those are the foundational tow truck regulations. And it's not as if they're never followed. But what I'm told by many licensed operators is that they're ignored a lot more often than they used to be. So you're kind of like coming at this from two issues. There's two issues here that are maybe reducing the number of times the regulations are actually being followed.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that call, Miroslav. We're getting questions about advice. So I'd like to pick on that for a second. This is similar to what we heard before, but I think it might be helpful for us to revisit this in a new perspective. A text that says, I'm a New Jersey resident and I have a New Jersey plate on my car. I'm also a member of AAA. How do these rogue tow trucks affect an individual's usage of AAA or their automobile manufacturer towing services? And what are one's rights to tell a rogue truck to hit the road? So 2 pieces there about AAA and then what your rights are when you actually are in that situation.
Under the rules, if you're in a crash and the police are there, they do need to use this list of licensed towers to keep things, the idea is to keep things fair. Mm-hmm. But certainly if your vehicle's disabled in some other way, there's nothing to stop you from calling AAA. And as far as backing off an unlicensed tower, look, I mean, I think these are business people. They're not, so look, if you decline their services, I think they're going to be on to the next one. I have not talked to any consumers who were like beaten up not for going with a chaser. But yeah, you have rights as a driver in New York City that it's worth checking again that DCWP website for those tips, just to have them in your back pocket.
Yeah. And what have we heard from Mamdani on all of this? Do you have a sense of whether he's going to take this issue on?
I asked Mamdani about this yesterday. He said that City Hall is aware of the issue. They thanked us for our reporting and said they'd be following up. I asked for specifics after that. Yesterday, I have not heard back, but we obviously are going to stay on this issue and try to learn how the city's going to get, or if the city's going to get their hands around this.
Yeah. And before I let you go, I just want to check in with you as well, because we talked about how officials who've tried to shine a light on this issue, they've faced some intimidation tactics. So, Liam, now that this piece is out, are you good? Any concerns about you being a target?
Not yet. And, that's part of being a reporter in New York City. It's you have to get into uncomfortable situations sometimes.
Absolutely. And we appreciate the work that you're doing. And we'll have to leave it there. I've been speaking with Gothamist WNYC reporter Liam Quigley, whose deep dive investigation into the unlicensed tow truck industry is available now at gothamist.com. Liam, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening to Brian Lehrer Weekend. We're back on the radio Monday morning at 10 a.m. In the meantime, follow us on Blue Sky at The Brian Lehrer Show, where there's always a conversation 24/7.